Hello and welcome to another installment of Turnstile Tours virtual programming. I'm Amanda and I usually do tours and help out a little bit behind the scenes. But today I'm going to be chatting with Dr. Sarah Litvin, the Executive Director of Reher Center for Immigrant Culture and History up in Kingston, New York. Sarah has a really special relationship with us at Turnstile Tours. She actually used to give tours for us a few years back. So I'm particularly excited to be talking to her today. But before we get started, before I turn you over to Sarah, I wanted to just get through a few housekeeping things. First of all, a big thank you to everybody for joining us today. We can't tell you enough how much we appreciate your supporting us. Through this process, we are very much used to dealing with live people, so this format is really new to us. Any sort of feedback that you have is much appreciated. We started these sessions in an effort to stay afloat and keep engaging with our community partners, as well as supporting our staff during this global crisis. So once again, thank you so much for being here today and for supporting us. During the course of this program, you have two different ways of engaging with both myself and all of the people behind the scenes, and Sarah, as well as the rest of the people who are joining us today, using Zoom's chat feature. You can either chat with all panelists, which means it'll just be me, Sarah, and the people behind the scenes with Turnstile Tours that'll get your questions. We'll then pass them along to Sarah. Or you can share with all panelists if you have, or rather you can share with everybody if you have comments or questions that you want everybody to see. Other than that, we appreciate any sort of feedback, questions, just keep letting us know what you're thinking as we're going along. Before I keep you for too much longer, I'm going to pass you along to Sarah. Sarah, can you hear me?
I can. Sorry, I am doing double duty. Trying to post to all of the Reher Center's pages as well. Andrew, I think you have my camera shut off, or somebody has my camera shut off. I can't turn it on.
Let's see. Well, as I mentioned, we're new to this format, so just a bit of technical difficulty.
All right, here we go. I started my video. Hello.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So can you tell us a little bit about who you are and how we know each other?
Yes. Well, it's amazing. Amanda and I used to work together at the Tenement Museum. After I was at the Tenement Museum, I started graduate school. I went for a PhD in history. It still sounds funny to be called Dr. Sarah Litvin. But during my second year of graduate school, I had met Cindy through the Tenement Museum because she also used to work there. And
Cindy's the owner of Turnstile Tours.
Yes, exactly.
For those who don't know.
Yes, and so I asked Cindy to lunch and basically told her that I wanted to come work for her and asked if there was any way that was possible. So I had a really amazing experience working for Turnstile for I think close to 3 years while I was in grad school, and it gave me this great opportunity while I was doing all this history research to actually be presenting and interfacing with the public. And so here we go once again, when all access to doing public programming is so shut off, Turnstile comes through once again and gives this great opportunity to share all the exciting stuff that I've been learning and we've been doing at the Reher Center. So thank you.
So can you tell us a little bit about the Reher Center, what it is and what you're doing there?
Yeah, so actually maybe I should start my slides because it's easy to have a graphic. How did that go? Can you see it?
Perfect, yeah.
Great. So the Reher Center, there's me with my Turnstile Brooklyn Navy Yard t-shirt in front of it. That is the storefront for Reher's Bakery, which was a family-owned bread bakery for 80 years. It opened in 1907 and closed in 1980. And the picture to the right, you can see, is the actual full structure that today makes up the Reher Center for Immigrant Culture and History. So it's 2 buildings that are joined together. That storefront is there on the bottom, you can see. Upstairs is an apartment, and that's where the Reher family lived, and there were 10 of them who were living there in 1910. So this is very much an immigrant family story, similar to the kinds we used to tell at the Tenement Museum. But this is in Kingston, and I'll give you a little bit more context about that in a minute. Just to keep walking you through the building, the third floor of it was another apartment, and that was a space that was rented out to various families. So just using census records, we know in the 20th century, there were, or actually going even further back, altogether living at this building from 1877 when it was built, there were at least 10 different families from 5 different countries who lived in this building.
Sarah, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I'm just going to stop you for one moment. I realized I forgot to mention that we do have closed captioning, live closed captioning available today for anybody who would like to use it or who needs it. So I just wanted to let everybody know about that.
Which is also a good reminder to me to talk more slowly so Stephanie can actually have a chance. So just the other piece of the building that you can see, that shorter 2-story one, actually I can use my pointer, look at that. This here was the oven room for this bread bakery, and upstairs here was actually the hay loft for the delivery horses, because this business was kind of like the ice cream man today. They were actually like a lot of restaurants today where they drive around and would deliver their bread products to folks all over Kingston. So we are converting this historic site into a museum and a cultural center. And it's a project that was started back in 2004 by a group of volunteers. This picture in the window you're seeing here, this is of Jaime Reher, who was the youngest of the family. The Rehers didn't have any descendants who were close to this structure and this story, and Jaime actually ended up donating the building to the Jewish Federation of Ulster County because of our founder, Jeffrey Miller, and Barbara Blass, and Barbara Cohen, but it was Barbara Blass who was a good family friend of the Rehers. And so they had this idea to donate it and to convert it. So it's a project that's been going on since 2004. And I got lucky to get involved back in 2016. And so we've been working bit by bit all this time to stabilize the building and then to open it up for all different kinds of public programs.
Very cool. Yeah, so can you tell us a little bit about kind of what can we learn about the relationship of the Hudson Valley area where you are in Kingston and the immigrant experience in New York City? Kind of what's the connection there?
Yeah. So actually, it's probably helpful. Oh, this is a picture of many of the Rehers. But here's what I wanted to show you to kind of answer that. So here, I did it from the Brooklyn Navy Yard up to the Reher Center in Kingston. It's about 100 miles. We're up in the Hudson Valley on the west side of the Hudson River. And it, like many, many towns throughout the Hudson Valley, these were places where immigrants came for jobs, right? So many of them, including Frank Reher, came in through New York City. He was originally from Krakow. He was a Jewish immigrant who came in the late 19th century. And we don't know why he chose Kingston, but he, with his wife and 2 young daughters, moved up and settled here back in the early 20th century. So there had been generations of immigrants who'd been coming, in part because of industry connected to, especially the canal. The Delaware and Hudson Canal opened here in the Rondout in 1828. And so there were immigrants coming from Germany, from Ireland, kind of the same waves that we see in New York City history, but folks who came up to the Hudson Valley, not just Kingston, but lots of other places too. So I see so many things flashing. I don't know if there are questions in the chat or anything like that, but that's kind of a little bit of the history. Just to give you a sense, though, of Kingston for those who haven't been here. I chose this map to show it because Art Walk Kingston is an amazing event that happens. It's going to be this year on September 19th and 20th. And it's like an open house of all the different galleries across Kingston. And it's a really wonderful event. We didn't make it in time to be on the map this last year. But what's really neat about it in terms of kind of showcasing the geography of Kingston is you can see the different neighborhoods. So this one down here is called the Rondout, or downtown neighborhood. And that's where the Reher Center is located. We're right next to the Art Society of Kingston and the Storefront Gallery. So right here at the corner of Spring Street and Broadway.
And is the downtown area historically like an immigrant neighborhood?
Correct. So this is the neighborhood that really developed up around the canal and all the industry and all the families who moved there to get those jobs. So this was really built up from the mid to the late 19th century. That was when it was a boom town. And it made the industry that happened here on in the Rondout made Kingston the third busiest port on the Hudson River. So wow. It was New York City, Albany, and then Kingston. So that's one of the kind of three neighborhoods. But the neighborhood that had been called Kingston, the only place called Kingston before then, was actually up here. And it's also called the Stockade District. And so many folks who come visit Kingston think of the colonial era history, or the Dutch history of Kingston. Kingston was the place where the New York State Constitution was first written. It's where the British burned the city of Kingston in 1777. And there's, of course, a cluster of art galleries and wonderful things to see up there, as well as the Senate House Museum and wonderful, beautiful streets and businesses to visit. And then there's the Midtown neighborhood. And actually what we're going to be talking about a little later in terms of the history of sewing in Kingston is really connected to this Midtown neighborhood. And Midtown developed in the late 19th century, in part because of a kind of rivalry between uptown Kingston and downtown Kingston. So downtown Kingston had just been a farming village up until the canal opened and all these new houses and immigrants and jobs really built it into this industrial might. And so in 1872, uptown Kingston and downtown Kingston merged. And as a result of that, all of the municipal buildings, the city hall, the post office, and the railroad, which becomes super important to our story, those all got built midtown in Kingston.
Oh, interesting.
So.
Interesting. And so when you're talking about kind of the different industries in Kingston, what are kind of the major industries that are existing kind of in this area?
Well, I mean, when people think about it, oftentimes they think about bluestone or they think about cement. Rosendale, which is just a 20-minute drive away, is the town. You know, Rosendale cement is what was used for the base of the Statue of Liberty and for the Brooklyn Bridge. People think about shipbuilding, they think about brickyards. But part of what we're doing at the Reher Center, this, you know, what we're in the midst of right now is researching another whole set of industry, which was the garment industry. And what's really exciting to me about this, based on sort of my background and interest in women's history and women and work, is that these are really jobs that were historically and still today taken by women, and the way that women were able to, whether they were single, married, you know, young, old, they were able to find a way to support themselves. And they were also able to pass on their own traditions. And express creativity through the garment trades. So that's a lot of the research that we're working on right now.
And can you tell us a little bit about maybe what's coming out of that research, or what we might be able to learn about the?
Sure. Let's see what I've got here. Well, first off, just to give you a little bit more perspective on our site, I had mentioned there was that hayloft that was above the historic oven room. Well, we converted that into a gallery. And so we're really excited about the exhibition that we're going to create in this space when we can, that is going to be called Sewing in Kingston. And we're going to also have a catalog that accompanies it. So here is an example of the kind of catalog that we made for our first exhibition called The Story Continues, which was all about the contemporary immigrants who are in the Rondout neighborhood now. So it was historically an immigrant neighborhood, and maybe folks know about that, and certainly the Reher family is a great entree into telling those stories. But there's still tons of immigrant small business owners and artists who are there now. And that was what, you know, this, through photographs and essays, was telling. So it's called The Story Continues. And you can see the link to purchase it if you'd like to help us out down there. on this slide. So going
Um, just to take you back a little bit before we get too deep into the Kingston sews, the Reher Center itself, like if we were to visit, and what would we see there? Is it a singular gallery space, or can you tell us a little bit about the physical space, since we can't unfortunately see it?
No, that's such a good point. So what we are working on right now, well, let's see how best to show you the answer to your question. You know what, let me play for you this little video that gives kind of an overview. I'm gonna have to try to share a different screen, so let's see how this works. Bear with me. Think. Is that working?
No, we're seeing the link.
Give me a second.
Oh, let's see if, oh, no. Just bear with us a few minutes.
Here we go.
There we go.
All right. Welcome to the Rondout neighborhood in Kingston. As you can see, the two sides of Lower Broadway look rather different.
On the west side, the buildings date back to the early 19th century, when the Rondout neighborhood mushroomed in population, thanks to jobs created by the Delaware and Hudson Canal, which opened here in 1828. For over a century and a half, these buildings bustled with the sounds, smells, and tastes of immigrants and migrants from around the world, who worked, opened businesses, and raised their families here. The east side of Broadway looks quite different. Here you can see 1980s townhouses and empty fields. This landscape is a result of Kingston's urban renewal project, which tore down 427 buildings in this neighborhood between 1966 and 1970, ripping apart its social and economic fabric. Today, the Rondout attracts locals and tourists alike with its cute boutiques and restaurants. But what is there to show the history of the multiracial, multi-ethnic, working-class population that lived and worked here before urban renewal? Not much.
That's where the Reher Center comes in. Based on the remarkable artifacts the Reher family left behind before donating the building, including the bakery's Sunday list of standing orders, we have prototyped and piloted Reher's bakery tours for public and K-12 audiences over the last 2 summers. These are designed as facilitated storytelling experiences that bring this bakery back to life. We showcased the retail shop on Sunday mornings in 1959, when Kingstonians from the German, Irish, Italian, and Polish communities converged at Reher's Bakery to pick up rolls for breakfast on their way home from church. Then we bring visitors into the oven room, which is left in its current state to show how the Reher family worked together to make the bread and how little changed here over time. Visitors raved about our... So that's kind of what you would see. You would get a chance to come. They're kind of like tenement museum style tours, actually. Let me just get back to the proper sharing.
Yeah, it definitely, you've got the kind of recreated space alongside with the kind of ruined space that you can see both sides of the story, which is just kind of a great way of engaging visitors in that kind of experience.
Yeah, and so, I mean, the whole thing started, basically the Reher family left the space as it was. They just got too old to operate their bakery. And so everything was left, artifacts from everything from the 1890s. We have handwritten Yiddish letters from the 1890s. We have, you know, like, I don't know, windshield wiper fluid, like from the 1980s, just like all together. And so when I started, the first summer I was there, I worked with a wonderful archivist named Samantha Gomez-Ferrer, and we just went through everything and tried to figure out what happened here. What is this story? So the slide that I'm showing right here is actually kind of our key artifacts. It's called the Sunday list. You can see up here. It's handwritten on a brown paper bag. And when I saw this, I said, this is like, this is the key. One of our board members calls it a Rosetta Stone. This told the story of what the community was who was here. And in the mid-20th century, we date this to around 1959. You can see all different kinds of names here. I mean, folks who are from Kingston know the Tremper name, right? It's one of those names that's just on streets and it's everywhere here. There are Irish names, Gallagher. There are Polish names, there are German names. And so it really showcases the descendants of those initial immigrants who came to work in industry in this neighborhood or to start businesses like the Rehers. Their descendants were coming in the late 1950s. And as I showed in the film then, urban renewal, this major project where the federal government offered cities like Kingston money to do what they saw as slum clearance, right? It totally ripped apart the fabric of this neighborhood. So you talk to the folks who lived there, who grew up there, whose grandparents' houses were there, and they didn't see it as a slum. Some of them maybe did, some of them didn't. And the opportunity to give them a platform to share their stories and to hear those different perspectives of what it was like growing up there and what this community meant is really the heart of what we're doing. So it's both, creating opportunities for the public to come learn about it. If you don't know about Kingston, it's kind of a fascinating look into a small family business and a way of understanding this place. And if you are from Kingston, it's a way of having a space to actually kind of commemorate that community that once was. And I think it's a really important project. There's a wonderful new book out by a historian called her name is Elizabeth Cohen. It's all about the history of urban renewal and sort of trying to look at it in a more complicated way. So I'm only partway through the book. It's terrific, but some of those big picture ideas about urban renewal, about community change, whose neighborhood is it anyway, all those things are things that we bring out on these tours, as well, of course, as bread. We break bread together and have the opportunity to really learn about this tradition and what does it mean, as I learned so well on giving Turnstile programs, what does it mean to take your food or your tradition with you from your home country, and it becomes something new when you arrive here.
Great. So yeah, can you tell us, we had started a little bit before about some of the upcoming exhibits and things that people may be able to see once we're all kind of open and going again. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of that?
Yeah. So these tours are a major thing. Oh, and I should have mentioned, just to finish this whole Sunday list thing, you can visit it. So you can hear some of the interviews and oral histories with folks from our website, which is rehercenter.org. Or if you go to sundaylist.org, you'll get there. So you can see that even while we are closed. But the plan has been, and I hope still will be, to really launch our public tours this summer. And have them on Saturdays and Sundays, and to bring in a lot of school groups in the coming fall and spring. So we're actually planning to do a virtual field trip with one of the classes who was supposed to come this spring. We're going to do that in a couple of weeks, and we'll see how that goes. And if you're a teacher and you're interested in doing a virtual trip with us, please be in touch, because we're all learning and figuring it out. And we have a lot of really interesting and compelling stories and artifacts to share and look at together. We just can't have you come right now. So if you're a tourist or you're a Kingstonian who wants to come visit, the Sewing in Kingston exhibition is going to be a really big part of what we're doing. But before I get into that anymore, let me just tell you about one more thing that I'm super excited about.
Sure.
Every year we do the Kingston Multicultural Festival, which is this is going to be the 8th annual festival. And it's a day when all different cultural groups from around the Hudson Valley come together. There are performances, there are activities for kids, whether it's paper crane making or learning how to spell your name in Cyrillic, or all different wonderful things. We're refusing to cancel it this year. We're going to create a digital festival. So we're still figuring out exactly what that's going to mean. If you have ideas, if you have a background in, interactive interfaces like this and want to talk to us, because we're really committed to continuing to engage these different performing groups and cultural groups and to really celebrate the cultural diversity of this area. So June 14th is the day we're going to plan to still launch that, and hopefully we'll have interactives kind of like what we're doing now with different groups that day.
Yeah.
But save the date and follow us to get more
Great.
about that. Okay.
June 14th.
June 14th. So Sewing in Kingston, I am so excited about, because this is really a story that has been told in pieces, but never the kind of full holistic way of looking at it as a part of Kingston's history. So let me just give you a little preview in the short time that we have. First off, I just want to give a hats off and a huge acknowledgement to many of the folks who are sewing in Kingston today and who have converted their businesses into making face masks. So on the left, you see Amelia DeSico Buono, who owns Prom and Wedding, which is an alteration shop. And she's a second-generation Italian immigrant. Her family has had this business in Kingston since 1973. And on the right, you can see the young woman sort of in the foreground of that picture here. This is Maria Cabrera, who is an immigrant from Puebla, Mexico. And she's been working in Kingston since 1998, when she actually started working for a company called Robert Tonner Dolls, which is a wonderful high-end doll company that was local here and is going to be featured in this exhibition. As part of her work there, she got to go down to Parsons School for Design and became a master pattern maker before she finally decided to open her own business in 2006. So both of our sort of major alteration seamstress shops are working on masks right now. But I think it's important that these are women, and they're, in one case, an immigrant woman, daughter of immigrant women. So often this is the story. If you think about, as a woman, this is a skill that you'll have from your home country, and you can come here, and even if you don't speak the language, right, even if you don't have transferable degrees, this is the way that you can get a leg up into the economy. And we see this generation after generation. I just put this map back here because Midtown is so important to the story of sewing in Kingston. And what you can see, the outline, these squares here, are actually converted garment factories that are today where a lot of artist studios are. And so it's a really interesting piece of the story. And again, it's connected in with the story of Kingston's development, and why Midtown emerges as the center of the garment industry is because the train is coming through there.
Yeah.
So I'm just gonna keep going.
And that's so many of those types of old factories are being converted into artist lofts. That's kind of a very common thing. And my dad lives in one actually in North Adams in Massachusetts.
And Lowell, Massachusetts.
Yes, a very common.
And so this is exactly that story, right? This was just an article from October. The redeveloped factories go for almost $10 million. But this gives you a sense. Also, Kingston is known for its beautiful murals. We have the O Positive Festival every fall, where we get all kinds of beautiful new murals. So another reason to come check us out. So the story, and I know we don't have a lot of time to really dig deep into the history here, but I think it's really important. This image on the left comes from F. Jacobson and Sons, which was a shirt maker. And I just love this, right? It has 50 fine jobs open. If you get one of these jobs, you will be a mighty lucky girl. You will work in a spotlessly clean daylight factory, good, healthful sunshine in every nook and corner. At noon, you can spread out your lunch in a clean, up-to-date lunchroom. So this was an ad that was put in the Kingston Daily Freeman in 1916, just before the factory opened.
How accurate are those ads? Was it Jacobson?
I think it speaks to exactly, right, a number of different pieces of it. First of all, obviously, like the gender issue of like a lucky girl, right? But it's also, there were real issues in factories. I mean, I'm sure folks listening are familiar with the story of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in New York City, which was just 5 years earlier. So the idea that it was clean, that there was a bathroom that you could go to, which we don't actually yet have a functioning staff toilet at the Reher Center. So to me, I was like, oh, it does sound good. But in any case, I think those pieces are interesting. The other part that's interesting about this is, why is it opening in Kingston, right? Like so many factories at that time, these were manufacturers who were in New York City, but because of the growth of union organizing, it was too expensive to be there in New York City. It made more sense to move your factory to some other place. And if you think again about the history of what was going on in Kingston at that time, all these workers who had been employed for the canal, for all this industry, that was really dried up. And so in the 19 teens, there was a large unemployed or underemployed labor force. But it wasn't the men who were getting these jobs, it was the women. So it's a really interesting piece of the sort of gender aspect of this history. I've got a couple of statistics that I just thought were kind of interesting to think about with this. I mean, well, actually, my statistic that I had that was so interesting was from the 50s, which is kind of speaks to this second ad, which is that 1 out of 5 garment firms went under every year. This is an extremely cutthroat business. So when we talk about the manufacturers trying to find a cheaper source of labor, it's not because necessarily they're bad people. It was an extremely cutthroat industry. But this relationship between the manufacturers and the people who are actually making their stuff is a really important one to see. So if you're on the kind of union side, and you can see here, this is an ad from 1946, and it's saying, to all the employees of Kingston Knitting Mills, Barclays Knitting Mills, join the union, but join the correct union, is what this ad is saying. Join the International Ladies Garment Workers Union. This just sort of speaks to all the different angles that there were within this, that there's divisions within the union, the labor union, there are divisions within the manufacturers and who are the people who are making these things and what do they want. And oftentimes this got all connected up with who was in New York City and who was out in places like Kingston. So Kingston Knitting Mills, for example, they had mills all over the place, or actually Jacobson's had them in Albany and Troy and Kingston, and they all opened those around the same time.
Interesting.
So just a little bit more about this, and I'm sorry it's a little bit disjointed, but we're just kind of doing it all as best we can. But there's sort of like 2 eras of this, right? If you think about what was going on in the 19 teens in terms of the safety conditions and the issues of expenses for factory owners and updating those factories, a lot of the what were called like integrated operations, they decided to not have the manufacturing under the same roof. Instead, they sent that out to somewhere where it was cheaper labor. And then in the 30s, around the time of the Depression, a lot of the New Deal policies then were very sympathetic to labor. And so once again, there were these efforts to move outside and have what they called like cut and sew operations, as opposed to having an integrated shop where the manufacturer had to have, a full staff of people there. Kingston had 37 garment factories at its height, which is kind of amazing to think about. Today, it's a very different picture and a very different story. And a lot of the factories that were here closed in the 60s, in the late 60s, when, again, the same set of patterns happened as finally unions were able to make inroads into garment factories, even in outlying areas like Kingston. And factory owners sought greener pastures, whether it was down south or overseas. So that's a lot of of the kind of like the big picture story of what happened and some of the themes that we're going to be working on.
And so what happened when a lot of those smaller shops start closing down?
In terms of,
I mean, so when those bigger shops start closing down, what starts happening to the garment industry? Do we see it spreading outside of Kingston or continuing to kind of grow there?
Yeah, well, it's kind of a combination. It's interesting. So, for example, Barclays Knitwear in 1975 moves over to Connecticut, but there are still a lot of skilled workers who are here. So actually there are some new businesses that crop up in the 70s and 80s. Ameribag, if folks are familiar with that company, they open here. There's today a company called Community Manufacturing Solutions that's here in Kingston. Wonderly's is a drapery factory that has stayed here since 1917. It's still open today. So there's kind of a range of different ways. Some businesses just moved away. Others opened to kind of pick up the skilled employees who had been let go from those businesses. I want to tell you one specific story, because a lot of the work that I've been doing in preparing for this show has been oral histories. And this is a woman named Helena Shavinsky, who was an immigrant who came from Kiev. And she was born in 1925. She came here, what year did she come here? In 1956, right before her daughter turned 2 years old. And she got a job very shortly after she arrived in Kingston Knitting Mills. And she was the only woman on the knitting room floor. And so this photograph that you're seeing of her here is her at the jacquard knitting machines, which were really complicated. And I actually want to play a little piece of her oral history so that you can hear her describing what it was like. You're going to hear her voice at the very beginning, and then you're going to hear her daughter take it over. So take a listen to this.
Once, and then I was making cards, right? You worked your way up to one of the most difficult machines. These are jacquard machines, and they would work off of like piano rolls. You can do up to 4 different colors of yarn. And she would come home, and they would be trying to do sweaters at the time for kids who had pictures of like race cars and cowboys and stuff like that. Well, she couldn't do all that. So she said, Mariana, can you draw this for me? So I draw it out on the graph paper, and she would translate it out, on the graph paper to the colors that they need, and we'd transfer it onto the card. So when the 2 summers that I worked with her, I learned how to punch the cards for this. It was essentially a binary system. She was well respected because she was the one that helped them by teaching the menders how to fix some things. They reduced a lot of waste. And the other part of it is the head designer. You remember, oh God, what was his name? Milton? He was the designer that would, the guy who would come from New York. He would go around to they had several knitting mills, and he would come to Lena and say, Lena, can you do this and do that? So even when the knitting mill was closed, we still kept that punch machine, and she was still making the cards for the other knitting mills.
And I've got we can take questions or whatever, that's kind of the end of my slides, but the daughter of the former factory manager at Kingston Knitting Mills shared with us this amazing footage of what those machines actually looked like in operation. So let me play for you this, and we can open it up if that makes sense.
Yeah, so if anybody has any questions for Sarah about the Reher Center, the work that you're doing there? Well, I have just a quick thing also before, while people are kind of thinking about their questions. Now that we've kind of heard everything about what you're doing there, what can we do to help or to contribute to your work? Is there a volunteer program, a membership program, or?
Yeah, so we absolutely have, committees working on all different kinds of projects, and that is pretty much our volunteer program right now. Is like, I'm a staff of 1, so to get everything done that we need to do. So yeah, a great example of that right now is getting ready for the Multicultural Festival to make it digital. If that's something that you have experience with or want to get involved with, we can do it digitally because it's a remote project. Once we're open again, we're going to need volunteers for all kinds of staffing public programs, for helping with publicity, all different types of opportunities to get involved. I mean, we're building a museum from the ground up. So for me, every day I'm wearing 18 different hats, and as many other people who want to, help put one of those hats on, I'm extremely excited and grateful. I should say I'm not all alone in this. We have an amazing, amazing board and set of volunteers who've already been working with us on these different projects, many of whom have had to just shift gears as fast as I have and everyone else in the world has in getting ready for this spring's and summer's programs.
So I actually have a couple questions from some viewers here. First is Hugo wants to know why do you think it's important to keep the stories of immigrants relevant?
Why is it important to keep the story? Well, I think it's about how we all connect with each other and how we can have empathy in the world for people who are different from us. I mean, one of the amazing things that I've experienced in doing these oral histories is to see when I interview a young woman from Colombia who came just a few years ago, or I talk to, you know, descendants of Italian immigrant workers who were, you know, working in these factories in the 40s. The stories are similar in many ways. And I think that having those folks, so one of the public programs that we plan to do once we can do public programs is called Voices from Behind the Machine. And so the opportunity for folks to meet each other and share those experiences across difference, across time, age, background is a really exciting thing. And for the folks who get the opportunity to see that interaction and understand what that's like from the outside, I think it's a really powerful sort of affirmation of shared humanity, especially now, right, when immigrants can be vilified in many ways in this country.
That kind of leads well into Deb's question. So are there any other programs on the horizon besides Sewing in Kingston?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to be really focusing on the K-12 bakery tours and being open to the public that way. The public program series that accompanies Sewing in Kingston is really exciting. On Labor Day weekend, we're going to have a whole lecture by Dr. Andy Battle, who's really a specialist, and I do appreciate the complexity of the labor situation probably too much, which I haven't practiced trying to simplify it, say it out loud, but he does it brilliantly in his writing and his speaking. So I think I was trying to channel him, but didn't do as well as he will do. On Labor Day weekend, we're going to do factory tours of Wonderly's factory and of Community Manufacturing Solutions. So there's a whole lot coming up that we've already got planned. We're going to do a children's clothing repair workshop with some wonderful folks who have a startup called Cahoots that's working on a circular economy of children's clothing. So lots of stuff coming up.
Great. So there's going to be lots to see in the future. Hopefully we'll all be opening up soon. Just a couple more questions before I let you go. Allie wants to know, what's the biggest industry and employers in the Kingston area, and how have the demographics changed? Is it similar to what's happening in Newburgh with upper middle class transplants from New York City?
Oh, it's such a good question. So part of the story that kind of comes in at the tail or overlapping with the story of the garment industry in Kingston is IBM. So IBM opened here in the 50s. It was here till the 90s, and there was about 7,000 people who worked for them, and that was the major industry. When they left in the 90s, it really left a major kind of gap. So today, and I'm sure there are Kingstonians on here who could correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that it's the hospitals that are the biggest employer in Kingston today. There are a lot of small business owners who are here, and there are a lot of transplants, people who have weekend homes who are coming up from New York City. I kept hearing Brooklyn is moving to Kingston, and of course I did move from Brooklyn to Kingston in July. But yeah, so some of those dynamics are similar and some are different.
Okay, well, so any more, unfortunately we are running out of time. Any last things you want to say before we go? Any more thoughts before we say goodbye?
From me?
From you, yeah.
Well, just to thank you again so much for this opportunity to share what we're working on, you know, both what we've done and the works in progress. And I just want to encourage folks to follow us, to visit our website. We've got a lot of really great stuff. We have a digital portal where you can visit our collection. You can email me at sarah@rehercenter.org. Tell me what you thought of this. Tell me what I got wrong. Tell me, you know, that you've got amazing artifacts from your family that you want to share with us for Sewing in Kingston. We're going to be sharing stories about the garment industry piece by piece over the next several months because we've just collected so many wonderful anecdotes. And I guess I also just want to say thank you so much to all of the supporters in Kingston and around the country who have been cheering us all on and supporting us in so many ways, including financially, as we've been working to build what's essentially a startup museum. So thanks to the board and thanks to everybody else.
Well, thank you so much for the work that you're doing up there and the stories you're telling, and for joining us today. I'm excited to come up and visit the Reher Center, and I'm sure that the rest of our viewers are as well. So thank you again, Sarah. It's been really great talking to you.
Thanks, Amanda. Thanks, Turnstile.
So let's see. I think you have to unshare your screen, maybe.
Okay. I don't know. Stop share. Got it.
There we go. Okay. So just a few more things before I let everybody go. One more time, thank you again so much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this program all about the Reher Center and the great work that they're doing up there. And also, I hope you'll be joining us tomorrow. We'll be talking with Adam Friedman about how the current crisis is affecting New York City manufacturing, which really ties in nicely a bit with what we've talked about today, and what some of the manufacturers in New York City are doing to help out, just like some of the sewers up in Kingston. And then also Sunday, we'll take a step back and look at wartime production in Brooklyn Navy Yard during World War II. Sunday at 4 p.m., we also have All Things Chocolate with Rhonda Kane and Ronnie Suze back at Essex Street Market in part of our How It's Made series. So one more time, last but not least, thank you to everybody, especially all of our viewers, and to, of course, Sarah Litvin, and to our staff behind the scenes. We've got Brian Hoffman as producer, Stefan Dreisbach-Williams as our live captioner. And one more time, thank you to everybody for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.